knew that we were honoring our graduates today, and in the midst of a kind of a family reunion thing for me, I got to thinking about tomorrow's generation. It doesn't matter what you think of it. A new generation follows an old generation. They have different ways, different ideas, different thoughts, different music, different culture, all kind of things. And so things change, and if they don't change, they usually die. But it got to me to thinking about it. David wrote a song of sorts in chapter 22 of the book of the Psalm. And in that psalm, he declares some of this. It talks about future generations. In 1976, there was a lady by the name of Gail Sheeling. Gail was a renowned author, and she published some books, one of which she called Passages. And in the opening chapter of that book, she declares that it's one of the most terrible days in her life, she said. She was a news reporter and had been sent to Northern Ireland to cover the war that was going on there. She had been sent down there to write a story mainly about women and what they were doing and how they were coping with life in the middle of a war zone. She said she was standing on a balcony one day and she was looking over the crowd of people who had just finished a civil rights demonstration when a young boy was standing next to her explaining everything that was going on. All of a sudden, she said, right in mid-sentence, a bullet comes streaming in and without being graphic, tore his head off, his whole face. She fell to the cement. He fell on top of her, dying, bleeding out right there. And she said it was terrible. British troops sprayed the crowd with bullets. People were scurrying and running, trying to find some sort of defense from it. She said that they crawled behind rocks and fences and corners of buildings just trying to get out of the way. For nearly an hour, she said, bullets kept them pinned in fear. She said she saw 3 young boys jump and run down from a barricade to make a run for a house, and she said they were cut down like ducks in a shooting gallery. She said there was a priest who followed them, and even though he was waving a white handkerchief, he was cut down immediately. Even then, there was an elderly man who had went over and knelt down by some young men that had been killed and was praying over them, and he was shot down. She said it was the most terrible maybe day in her whole life. She said it's almost unexplainable. She said it was like a scene from a slaughterhouse or even a battlefield. And finally, after the gunfire had stopped and she said things sort of settled down for a moment, the British troops came in, did an invasive search house to house looking for members of the Irish Republican Army. Thousands of people were trapped inside of the Catholic ghetto, and armored cars, she said, blocked the streets and exits. Panic kind of kept everybody pinned down in their rooms behind doors that were locked. She says that she tried to pray, but it didn't seem to be of any avail. She tried to picture God in that crazy moment of her life. But all the while, all she said, and this is kind of funny, but she said all the while she thought of a children's little thing that she remembered when she was young that said something like, if you only had one wish in the whole world, what would that wish be? And she said it just kind of kept going over in her mind. What would she do if she could wish for one thing right at that moment? So she decided, as she was thinking about that she wanted to talk to her boyfriend in New York. So after some time, she finally got a landline, she says in her book. She finally got a landline, was able to call and talk to her boyfriend. What she thought was he was going to comfort her, that he was going to help her to get through this. You can imagine what kind of chaotic day that must have been. And so she finally gets him on the phone, and she tries to talk to him, but for some reason, to her, he sounded uninterested. He talked a little bit, yeah, doing this, doing that. She thought maybe he's going to help erase all of the horrors of that day from her mind. But he seemed to be preoccupied, maybe busy with other stuff. And then all of a sudden, he kind of ended the conversation. He didn't hear the loneliness in her voice. And he just kind of abruptly ends the conversation and saying, "Stay out of trouble, okay, honey?" And that was the end of the conversation. And he hung up. And she felt the pain of that moment. He went back to his very safe world, his clean world, his bright world, and she was left alone in hers, her dark, lonely, confused world. "No one with me," she said. She said to herself, "Nobody here to keep me safe." And then Gail says something that kind of boggles your mind in that story. In that incredibly horrible moment of her life, terrible, traumatic time, a powerful feeling came over her, and she said just then, "More than anything else in the world, I want a baby." I mean, a baby? Come on now. In the middle of all of this trauma going on in your life, you want a baby? Everything tumbling down around her. Death splashed against the walls of the buildings. Fear and war paralyzing every person in town. And you want to have a baby? I mean, that's just weird, right? Why was it important, I thought to myself, why was it important for Gail to want to have a baby? And I thought about that, and I thought about graduation, and I thought about all of the things that's going on, and I wondered just why. I think that it probably has something to do with the same kind of feelings that David had going on in his mind when he wrote Psalm 22. David's mind was fixed on a family. It was fixed on his children. It was fixed on the events of his life. He was in a crisis when he wrote this. It put it to music. But the penning of verses of Psalm 22 tells us of the pain, of the frustration, of the suffering, of the loneliness. Have you ever been there? Where you just felt like you didn't have anybody, anything, nowhere. You're just left out there on your own, and you wonder, what is going on? Where am I at? What's taking place? That's kind of what David was. He was tired, I'm sure scared and dying, and as Saul wanted him dead, his children wanted him dead, some of them. He didn't know what to do, and he's faced with this, I think, threat of extinction when all of a sudden he realizes the candle of my life is about to go out. What do I do? And that's when God somehow snatches him back to reality from the grave, as it were. When his life sort of comes back to him for a moment, death kind of takes a holiday, and David sings this psalm in the verses that we have before us, 22, verses 22 through 31. And David begins to talk about it. And one of his thoughts, one of his major concerns here, in one of his primary thoughts, something that means more to him than anything else, is his need to have children and to pass something along. His need to tell them what I went through. And I thought about that as a parent, and I thought, that's why you want to tell your stories. That's what you want your children to know, what you went through, how you made it through, how you got through all the tough times of your life. Most of us who are sitting here and have any age on us know what it was like, tough days when you first got married, tough times, paying bills, doing things. And you want your children to know, hey, we went through tough times, but God is faithful. So that's what he says over and over again. And if you read this whole psalm, especially verses 22 through 31, he talks about descendants in verse 23. He talks about families in verse 27. He talks about his posterity in verse 30. And in verse 31, he talks about future generations. And then he talks about, in verse 31, people who aren't even born. He talks about them. He's just barely survived the crisis of his life. He has been in a lifetime of war. He's been in a lifetime of difficulties. He's faced lions and bears and giants. He has done all of these things, and all of a sudden it's like he's saying, like Gail Shealy, I just want to have a baby. I just want somebody to know what I'm going through. I want somebody to pass it on. So why are future generations apparently so important to David that he spends this whole time writing this song to sing about future generations? I think there's a couple of reasons. One is, children give us a taste of immortality. Now, when I was 20 years old, immortality seemed like it was going to be forever. I didn't think I'd ever die. I didn't think I'd ever even get close to dying. I remember when Teresa and I bought a house, we were like 18 years old, and the house cost like $18,200, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, or a bath and a half, brick home in Westwood. And we were sitting down to sign the papers, and the lady looked at us, and she pushed the paper over her sign. She said, now you know this house will be paid for in 2001. I'm going, lady, I won't even be alive in 2001. When you're 18 years old, 2001 was a long time away. And I said, we won't even be alive in 2001. I'll sign that paper. Let my kids pay for it. I don't care. So, I signed it now. And here we are, 2025. Guess what? I'm still breathing for the moment. Children give us a taste of immortality. It kind of links us with the future. They make us feel that somehow, even if we die, there's something of ourselves that lives on in our children. One songwriter tells of having his own children, talking about he took them to visit their grandparents, and he said mother got out an old photo album and they looked at the pictures of years gone by, and suddenly he's kind of struck with this thought of his pictures and his father, and he looks at them and they look like him, and he realizes how much he's like his father, and he pens a song, and it says, I'm seeing my father in me. I guess that's how it's supposed to be. I'm finding I'm more and more like him each day. I notice I walk the way he walks. I notice I talk the way he talks. I'm starting to see my father in me. I noticed that in my life, I did that. I went along, and all of a sudden I started getting older. I saw more of my dad in me. I saw more of his ways. I saw more of the way he acted and done things, and I realized that the older I got, the smarter he was. And the dumber I was. We remember those days. We understand that children give us a sense that whatever we've accomplished in this life, they're going to help it live on throughout our lives. But now, in the same way that his father lives on, our children live on with us. We come to the place where we talk about that here, David does. He knows that he's going to die one day. I know that. He knows he almost just died just a short while ago. But if his children live on, then he remembers, they will remember who he was. They'll carry on with them the essence of what his life meant. And so David said, death won't be so bad for me. Children, secondly, affirm our values and our ideals. David says, in essence, that they are confirming the value of our lives. Yesterday, we had a Riner family reunion. Our family consists of, my dad had 11 brothers and sisters. They indeed, in turn, had 34 grandchildren or first cousins. So yesterday, we carried on the legacy. Our parents are all dead. Every single solitary one of that 11 and their mates are all gone on. So we gathered in a place. We try to do it once a year. We have food catered in, and we sit and we talk. Yesterday, we gathered a bunch of chairs in a circle, and all the first cousins gathered in there, and we talked. We talked about family. We talked about our grandparents and our parents. We talked about how they raised us and what they taught us. And what that was, in essence, was a way of making them understand their value to us. They taught us things. They had left with us a legacy that we could carry on. So David is saying that he wants his children to worship his God. And I'm thinking, that's it. That's what I want. I don't care how successful or unsuccessful they are. I want them to love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and body. So that's what I want my legacy to be. I know that if I die and they love God, it will live on through them. And so David wants his descendants to look back and say that he was right on track. He may not exactly do everything perfect, but he was right on track. He wants his posterity to hear about the things that he went through, the problems that he faced, and then tell them to others about his testimony. I don't hide the fact that I had a tough teenage life. I don't hide the fact that I had problems with alcohol and drugs. But I want people to know, and I want my children to know, that it didn't have to stay that way, that God could come into your life and change your life. And so that they understand every circumstance they find themselves in, God has a way to help you out. So in essence, the children, they take hold of the parents' values. When we talked yesterday among all of us kids, they range from the oldest one being about 87 years old, all the way down to the youngest one being 70. Many of them have died and gone on, but their children carry on their legacy. And in that act, they sort of confirm what the parents believed was right. And that what they believed in. And so you carry that through. And that's why a profession of faith is so, I think, such a big deal for parents, is that these kids understand my dad, my mom, what they went through, what they believed, what they sacrificed for was a good thing. They don't have to believe it exactly like I do. They don't have to walk in the same footsteps that I walk in. But I want them to have a strong faith. I want them to have a strong faith. We were in this church in our early Christian life, and then a couple, 3 or 4 years later, we went on to pastored back then 37 years, I think it was, and then moved back here to assume responsibilities at this church, and we've been here for the last 14 years. One of the highlights that I had in coming back here was, one, to be in this church. This church had left values for me that I had carried with me. It meant something to me. It wasn't a big church then. It was we had about 25 people or so at that point in time, but it meant something. The second thing was to come back and be with Pastor Nams. Pastor Nams was the first pastor of this church, pastored it for like 27 years, worked hard, sacrificed, done without. I'm telling you, literally, sometimes didn't even take a paycheck in order to see the success of this church. I had the opportunity to come back and to be with him again. He never once tried to tell me how to pastor this church. He had plenty of knowledge and wisdom, I'm sure, but he never chose to do that. He only chose to lend himself to me and allow me to do and to go and to be what I needed to be. The one thing that I noted more about than anything else was that I knew he prayed for me. And he knew the values that he had instilled and the things he had taught me in the few short years we were here were things that I could carry on in the growth of this church. That's what David's talking about. He's talking about, man, I've had a crazy life. People's tried to kill me. I faced giants and lions and bears. All I want my children to know is I tried the best I could. And if they carry that legacy on, then that's the thing that I want to be a part of. David sings about here his posterity will serve him. Future generations will talk about and be told about the Lord. They will proclaim his righteousness even to a people yet unborn. The children of the church are a testimony to a changing world that God still is in control of things. It gives us a sense of immortality that it's going to live on. This church is 54 years old, or will be in October. And I hope if the Lord tarries that it lasts another 100 years or 50 years. And I believe it does in the affirmation of the values and the ideals that we hold dear into our lives. That baby you're holding right there today will have values that will be stemmed from its parents and its grandparents and even maybe its great-grandparents. My cousin had a book at the reunion that he had bought, and it was about Swainsboro, a little town not too far from here. And the volume 1 was about that thick, and it had 2 other volumes. And we were looking through the first one, and he had it marked. There was a page about the Riner's legacy, and he told all of the people. And I was able to trace my grandparents all the way back to my great-great-great-great-grandparents. And I watched as it unfolded and then down to my dad and his siblings. And I understood that the values that they had passed on from generation to generation to generation to generation. And I grew up thinking my dad didn't know much and he probably wasn't going to be right in all these things. And I found out later he was much smarter than I gave him credit for. So they give us a kind of sense of immortality. They affirm the values and ideals that we hold dear. Brother Dams didn't try to tell me how to run the church, but he showed me how to run it through his knees and prayer. Finally, children continue our pilgrimage. That's the one thing that struck me the most. There comes a time in a person's life when they realize they're not going to do it all. I grew up thinking I could. I thought until a few years ago I could do anything, and I found out I'm getting old. I found that out. And we realize that as we get to that point, maybe we're not going to get it all done, and maybe what we wanted to see done wasn't going to get done. But then we realize that we have children, and those children help us in that. Life is too short to do everything we want to do. I love to play golf, and every time I play, I wished I'd have started when I was 8 years old. Then I might have been halfway decent at it. And I told them earlier in the early service, I remember when I was, one of the things I regret the most is when I was about 7 or 8 or 9 years old, God began to deal with my heart in First Assembly in Savannah on a back pew. I felt like he was talking to me, and I wish now I'd have listened. Somebody said, do you have regrets in your life? I said, yeah. I regret I didn't accept Christ way much earlier in my life so I could have given him all those years I wasted. Life is too short to do all that we think that we want or can do. We're on an expedition, church. In Hebrews 11, it's not called expedition. It's called a pilgrimage. It's called going on, moving forward, one generation to the next generation to the next generation. Every now we were privileged to see 5 generations of young men and old men standing together. And we hope that the next generation will carry on where we've left off, and we'll move further down the road towards the kingdom of God. I know that I'm not going to be here all the time. There's coming a time I'm not going to be able to stand up here and preach 2 services. Sometimes I think that day was today. I've had a little tough time. But I know that this church is not going to quit. It's been here 54 years. It's been through people talking about its demise, and it's gone on anyway, and it's still going on. And I've got news for you. David Riner is not the head of the church, and it's not going to die when I walk out. It's going to continue to do, and I hope to do better. I hope it does better after I'm gone. That carries on a legacy for me. David writes about the struggles of his lives in the early verses of Psalm 22. And here in these latter verses, he's kind of reminiscent, and he gets to a place that he hopes that those struggles will somehow give direction to his children. He hopes that what he's gone through will teach them where they find the strength for the future. And that's what I did. Going in ministry, you learn that. You watch other guys. You understand what they're going through. A job's like that. When I was young, I worked at Great Dane, and when they put me on this certain area on a line, I had to do a job, and that job was to take a great big thing that worked off of a kind of a swivel, I think, and you put it up under there, and you pop 2 holes in an I-beam, and that thing was heavy, and I couldn't hardly maneuver it, and it was difficult to understand how to do it. So I said, I know what I'll do. And I went and found a guy who had been there the longest. And I stood there and I watched him. And I said to him, show me how to do that. And he'd take it and he'd just let it fling. It looked like it was no effort to him whatsoever. And he taught me how to do it. And I watched him, and I was able to do what he did, duplicate what he did without the struggles of trying to learn it all on my own. I didn't know it all, although I thought I did. And I realized he did. Well, church, that's what David's talking about. I hope my kids, I hope the future generations understand that if they watch our lives, we'll leave them a legacy that'll carry on. Don't do it exactly like I do it, but try to do it the right way in carrying on the point that we have in our lives. And so he's hoping that whatever he's gone through is going to teach them to find their strength, to realize what needs to be done. He hopes that the pains that he endures will help them find healing for their journey. If there's no one to carry on from here, then the struggles of David's life will seem to have no purpose. I want my life to have purpose. I want to teach whatever I can teach. I want to talk about whatever I can talk about. I want to teach my children. That's what Gail Sheila was thinking about when she wrote that book. That's what she was thinking about when her greatest wish that day on the battlefields of Northern Ireland was to have a baby. Somebody's got to carry on. Somebody's got to carry on. Somebody's got to change the world. Somebody's got to make it a better place to live. Somebody, the next generation, maybe they can do that. Maybe they can take what they've learned from us. Maybe they can apply it in their own way and make this a better place to live. Some years ago, a woman named Susan Linsky wrote a little poem about parenthood. I loved it. It went like this. I searched, but there was definitely not a packet of instructions attached to my children when they came. And none has since landed in my mailbox. Lord, show me how to be a good parent. Teach me, and I love this part of it, teach me to correct without crushing, to help without hanging on, to listen without laughing, to surround without smothering, and to love without limits the way that you've loved me. And I think that's what David was thinking that day. I made a lot of mistakes. He was a tough guy. I kind of pictured David as this strong guy whose will is like steel. He's done all these things. He's been all these places. He's fought all these battles. He's done everything. And all he wants to do is pass the good parts of that on to his children. He wants a legacy. I've thought about these graduates. I hope in some way they've been inspired by a parent or grandparent. I hope they've been taught to live life in its fullest, but to live it with value. To always recognize that God's imprint on them is the most personal imprint they could have. And when they stood up here a little while ago, I thought, okay, it's now to go. The future's in your hands. Do what you do. Do the best job you can do. I keep looking at the baby. She switched arms from grandma to grandpa. And I kept thinking, I made so many mistakes as a young parent. And I often wish I could have gone and done it again, but we're not afforded that privilege. So my point is to be the best and make it the best you can, to leave an impression on a future generation. I hope as a church we've done that in those who stood up across here a while ago. I hope. I was over in the children's building this morning. I went to a Sunday school class over there and talked to some little girls about foundations of faith. And I hope out of all that I rambled on about, they heard some of it. I hope that when I preach, I do more than scream. I hope I preach something that gives you something to live by and values to carry with you. Because I believe that's what David wanted. When it came to him losing his life, laying it down, finding the death, his biggest concern was leaving with his children a legacy of what he wanted them to do. Father, thank you for the opportunity to be leaders, movers and shakers. But Lord, sometimes it gets to the point that we've moved on. Hopefully we have made an imprint, left a blueprint, allowed people to see and learn from our mistakes and our good. I pray for this church this morning that we'll do more than just be a church, that we'll be a legacy for those who come and are a part of it. Lord, I pray for these young people that stood up here this morning, that they won't look at it as well, I'm out of the house and I'm on my own. But they'll go, what value was taught to me? What did my parents teach me that I can learn and carry forth? Lord, I want to be like David and leave a legacy. I want to leave a track to follow. They don't have to do it just like me. Lord, in the value of what you've laid in their hearts. So help us today, I pray.